Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Enable Boot Camp. Today, the cybersecurity for high-risk clients. This is the third in a series. So if you missed the first two, we've already done the cybersecurity for low and medium risk. Today is the final one, high risk. If we make any forward-looking statements during today's session, take it with a grain of salt. Final form and function and delivery dates may change. My name is Louis Pope. I'm one of the head nerds at Enable. My focus is on security. Background is from the MSP space. I've been here with Enable for 5 years now, and it's very much focused on practical security controls, implementation of security baselines, best practices. So today's session, as continuing the previous sessions, this is part of a larger journey. It's only the start. There's no way in the world we could fit everything we needed to talk about all of these different frameworks we're going to be covering today in a couple of 2-hour sessions. This is weeks and weeks of education, self-guided, additional learning resources you're going to need to take advantage of to really get to leverage everything we're going to be discussing today. But these are meant to be starting points, places to begin the journey on good cybersecurity practices, security baselining, and to see, well, what are the commonalities? What are the common things that are being asked for across the board, regardless of what compliance, regulatory agency, or industry you may be dealing with. And what we're covering today is going to cover you just as equally as it covers your clients. So I will try to make some distinctions here and there whenever I'm kind of referring to the uniqueness of the MSP and your relationship with your clients whenever it comes to risks and frameworks. But for the most part, everything applies to both. Since this is the third part in a series, and I want to make sure that I'm utilizing today's time as efficiently as possible, I'm going to throw up a poll question real quick for some feedback. Just let me know, did you attend any of the previous sessions, either the medium security or the low risk? That'll just let me know how much of previous content I need to review. It was about a 50-50 split this morning on the audience. And it looks like we've got, okay, majority of you have attended previous sessions. A handful of you have not. So encourage you, if you feel like I'm leaving you behind or that I'm going too fast, it's for the sake of fitting everything in within the 2-hour period that we have today. You're going to have to go back and leverage the recordings of the previous boot camps. That said, don't hesitate to ask questions as I go for some additional clarification, because there's a lot of things I can fit into today's discussion if I know somebody needs that piece of knowledge. So we are going to be making references to multiple different frameworks during today's session. These are going to be real useful for you. Some of these slides, especially when it comes kind of for comparison purposes and for general education. But if you're going to go implement anything that we're talking about today, you're going to do any further additional research, go grab the original documentation and the supporting documentation that's available for all of these different frameworks and standards. They're all out there. They're freely available. Shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes to find links for all of these. Most of these I've also already got links in the handouts that I provide for the security office hours. So if you have my security office hours handout, then there'll be some useful links already in there for some of these frameworks. And just because this is quite a few, this is a list of frameworks that you may not have any familiarity with. Just a quick slide for, well, what are all of these? And the NIST cybersecurity framework, I'm pretty sure everybody's going to have some knowledge or exposure to it. The CIS, which is the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls, that's a practically universal framework that you can apply to almost anywhere whatsoever, and you are going to get good mappings against other frameworks. And then there's other ones we'll be talking about: the CMMC, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, the Essential 8, which is for Australia, PCI DSS, so anybody that's ever had to do a PCI DSS audit for a credit card processor, you're familiar with those. CJIS is for the Criminal Justice Information Services, so that's going to be for your municipal, townships, sheriffs, police departments. Cyber Essentials for the UK, the HIPAA security rule, not the HIPAA privacy rule. We're not going to be talking, it's a little bit out of scope for the frameworks that we wanted to talk about, just focusing on the security aspect. And then the ISO 27001 is kind of an example of enterprise level guidelines and frameworks. But something important as a culmination point, for everything we've covered in the 3 boot camps altogether is that, well, these frameworks don't cover everything. They are just starting points, not your finish lines. And with that also goes the sentiment of, if you only implement to a framework, you are going to miss revenue opportunities. So if you do your due diligence and do care, and you do risk assessments of all of your clients, and you define them into strict low, medium, and high risk buckets, you are going to be leaving money on the table if you only pitch the low risk items to the low risk clients. There's nothing stopping you from pitching the medium and high risk remediations, mitigations, and security controls to a low risk if it's appropriate, they have the budget, and they want to consume those services. So don't think that just because a framework is only referencing something in a high risk situation, in a high risk environment, doesn't mean there's anything wrong whatsoever to having that as a baseline for yourself and your services for all your clients, regardless of their risk profile. Because again, if it's a revenue opportunity, why not pursue it? So first is asset management, hardware and inventory control. So we're going to be skipping over a lot of these slides. So if you are one of the few that was not here for the previous sessions, I'm going to leave I will leave the slides up for a few seconds. So if you want to grab a screenshot of some of these, feel free, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these that have already been covered in depth in previous sessions. Otherwise, it would be a 3.5, 4-hour boot camp today. But why is hardware inventory important? Why is having security controls and baselines important? Well, the simple thing is you cannot defend what you do not know about. And this applies to multiple different controls as well. You're not going to be able to implement a good vulnerability remediation and mitigation program if you do not have good asset inventory and know what applications, what servers, what appliances you have where, what firmware version they are on, what the end of life or the life cycle management for that device looks like. If you don't have good asset inventory, all of those other things are that much harder to implement. So for low risk, we'll see that all of the frameworks, they're calling for something. All of them say, hey, yes, asset inventory is a building block principle. They all have something to say about it. They all want you to implement it even at the lowest risk levels. And then at the higher risk level, there's only a few frameworks that are asking for a little bit more. And then when we get up to high risk, and then there's even a smaller amount of things that are being asked for by certain frameworks. And whenever we start looking at those, well, what are these common controls that are being asked for at these frameworks? By these different frameworks at these different risk levels, we'll see here with low risk, it's asking, create and maintain. And you're going to see create and maintain a lot because a lot of these security controls are not about point solutions. They're not about installing AV. It's about the supporting documentation, the processes, the workflows that you're implementing around it. So documenting, how do you discover devices? How do you authorize devices? How do you record it? All of these things are going to be things you have to address in low risk. When we move up to medium risk, then it adds some additional ask of us of, all right, we also need you to implement active discovery of assets connected to the network. So that's going to be an agent you got deployed. Well, you can use Essential, Insight, maybe EDR with Ranger on it, ZenMap, Nmap, whatever, but you need a tool to actively discover what is connected to your networks. And then also monitoring for unauthorized connections of unauthorized connections of devices to networks or other resources. So this is also going out into your cloud provider services, your M365 tenant, and making sure that you got a handle on what devices are connecting to it, access control lists and MAC filtering or similar types of control measures to control what's in the environment. And then when we move up to high risk, it adds in an important thing that a lot of them ask for is they want you to start performing passive asset discovery. And what they mean by passive asset discovery is they're wanting you to do the deep dive. They want you to go into your DHCP logs, into your DNS server logs, and look for traffic from devices or from MAC addresses or from IP addresses that don't belong, that are not authorized to be operating on the network. So for finding those rogue devices that are trying to hide themselves. If you intend, if somebody has implanted a rogue access point or a rogue device in an environment and are intentionally hiding it, then you're going to have a hard time discovering it with a network-based scan tool sometimes. That's why they want you to look at the totality of traffic to NetFlow to see if you can find unusual behaviors. SIEMs, intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems can assist there. And also they ask for physical inspection of rogue devices. So going into, on some type of recurring basis, going into the telco closet, into the server room, and visually inspecting to make sure that there's the devices that are present are the devices that are supposed to be there. They are authorized and approved. And these are things where, again, Essential and Insight can help out here a little bit by log retrieval, a little bit of service monitoring that can help out here. But this is, again, more of a process that you're going to have to implement and have as a recurring audit that you perform. And then asset management on software inventories. So having this capability and having the security controls are important because, well, if you don't know what applications are in the environment, it is really hard for you to stay up to date and aware of what you need to know about. Common question I get asked is, how do you stay up to date? How do you know what's important to follow? How do you keep up with everything? And the answer is you don't keep up with everything. It's impossible. It's a fool's errand. So what you have to do is you have to be intentional and follow what you need to follow. But the only way you know what you need to follow is by having a list. So you need to have an inventory of your software solutions and your applications that are at play. And you're going to need to know, and you're going to need that because, well, how else are you going to subscribe to the security bulletins, alerts, and notifications from that vendor whenever they have an issue and they push out a notification to let you know that there is a 9.8 CVSS vulnerability that needs to be immediately remediated, or as in the case of Barracuda security gateways 2 weeks ago, patch literally pull it out of the environment. So there's a lot of really good reasons why software inventory is important. It helps you with a whole lot of things. But what are the frameworks asking you to do? So there's going to be something asked on almost all of the frameworks about, yeah, these are the common things we want you to do across the board for everybody, regardless of their risk profile. So low risk up, you got to do this. Whenever we start looking at the medium risk, they're still asking for more things. And then when we eventually get up to high risk, you'll see it kind of starts tapering off a little bit. Some of the frameworks are like, now, if you're medium or low risk, you should have already been doing these things. So by the time you get to high risk, they're already in place. So we don't have anything else that they want you to do for high risk because it's already covered by the controls they're recommending for low and medium. What do those common low risk controls look like? Let me go back real quick. And again, these what I'm doing here with all of these mapping slides is this is just to kind of to show the pattern that as we're talking about these more basic building block security controls like inventory, asset management, network infrastructure, data protection, as we're talking about those basic ones, everybody's got something to say and everybody wants those controls implemented at low risk and higher because they're fundamentals. They are mission critical to the other more advanced controls you're going to be seeing asked for later. So you'll see as we go through these, it'll kind of start shifting from everybody's asking for something until we get to the higher end controls where it starts being the reverse, where not everybody is asking for it, only the high risk is asking. So common controls for low risk, again, create and maintain. You're going to see create and maintain a lot because it's about processes. It's not point solutions that you buy and install. It's the workflows and the other responsibilities that you implement to support. But they're going to want you to record what's in play, when is it supposed to be decommissioned, does it have an end of service date, only using authorized, currently supported software in the environments. Kind of those, again, those basics that they want everybody to implement. Then when we get up to medium risk, they start asking for active discovery. It's not just that you have a list that you created, it's that you have methodologies in place to actively update that list. Insight and N-central are great for that, for the asset discovery. Also implementing technical controls to make sure you're not doing things like allowing applications to run as root or system that do not need to be run at that level. And then at the high risk, they ask for the use of code signing or other technical controls to restrict the use of unauthorized scripts. So what a lot of them are saying is, do not allow unsigned PowerShell. Do not change your PowerShell signing policy to disallow running unsigned or externally signed PowerShell scripts. If you're not familiar with that configuration of PowerShell, you got a weekend project to go look at so you can get a better understanding of how that works, because PowerShell can be a popular vector for threat actors to use to abuse to implement lateral movement, payload drops, or living off the land attacks. And the nice thing about having N-central or Insight in play is you're able to use our agents to run the PowerShell codes or the automation manager codes, and you can be more restrictive with your external. Oh, well, you'll be able to be more aggressive with your do not run unsigned PowerShell configuration options. And also EDR, because it has components in it that monitor command line inputs, PowerShell, VBS scripts, and things of that nature. They're also monitoring those types of, they're also monitoring those for malicious activity, further additional compensating control there to improve what this is asking for. Don't allow weird, unknown PowerShell scripts to run in your environment that are going to cause damage. Data protection, and this is on identity and identifying and securing data. So this is not about data backups or recovering. This is about the protection of the data in use, in transit. Why is it important? Well, it's kind of back to the hardware thing. If you don't know what hardware you have, you don't know what to defend and protect. Same with data. If you do not know what data is where, what its classification is, who needs it for what purpose, you're going to have a hard time, showing that you have protected that data with due care and due diligence. And that's not day to day, that's not that big of an issue, but not being able to show due care and due diligence during the middle of a contract dispute or during the middle of civil litigation is not something you want to have happen. You want to be able to show due care and due diligence was practiced. So you're going to need to know what data is at play for a ton of reasons. And the frameworks control, the security controls, everybody's got something at the low risk level. There's a lot of, I don't say assumptions, but there's a lot of implied messaging in all of these frameworks that you have to treat the data a little bit more special than what you used to. And for MSPs, this is a little bit of a challenge because traditionally, it's been for a while, that's the client's data. We back it up, we protect it with an AV, but that's it. It's the client's responsibility to manage and take care of the data. But that is drifting now. That's becoming part of security conversations. It's becoming part of cybersecurity liability insurance conversations, and more responsibility is being MSPs are now being expected to carry more responsibility around data protection, not just data recovery. And we see that here because we are seeing it being asked for in low risk. We're seeing a lot of controls being asked for in medium risk environments. And whenever we get up to high risk environments, there's even more security controls that are being asked for, because one of the ways that you qualify the risk profile of a client or of an environment is based on the sensitivity of the data that they process. And the more sensitive that data is, the more controls you have to have around it. So for low risk, create and maintain is going to show up again, because you need that ability to create and maintain the processes and the documentation that are needed to execute everything else. You got to have that data inventory, update it annually, know who owns it, who processes it, what institutional purpose it serves, encrypting end user devices, encrypting data at rest, in transit, all those kind of basics. And then medium risk, common controls for medium risk environments. They want you to start getting into the classification of the data relevant to a regulatory body or to an industry standard. And as an example, if you are providing support to clients that are going to be concerned about CMMC because they hold federal contracts, well, one of the things they have to do is they have to classify all of their data. It needs to be classified as controlled, unclassified information, restricted, controlled, public, non-disclosed financial, federal contract information. All of that needs to be classified and marked as such so that you can apply proper data handling procedures to. So CMMC is a great example. If you have a client that has to worry about NIST 800, 171, or 172, or DFARS or ITAR, this is all going to be really big stuff. And again, traditionally, not been the realm of MSPs. This was usually more enterprise stuff, but it is now coming more into our realm. Then when we move up to high risk, it's asking to start, not only is it about the classification, it's about implementing data loss prevention measures. So they want you to implement data loss prevention measures on the endpoint, on the network, on your emails, on your cloud platforms to make sure that information is not leaving its enclave and going places it should not go. They want you to capture and log access to the data, modification and deletion of the data. And also implementing, a lot of them ask for other compensating controls to prevent data leakage, such as additional controls around secure mobile device or secure removable media. Nobody can, no device can auto mount that's mounted as an external drive. If it's going to mount as an external drive, it has to be on the pre-approved list via serial number or vendor identity to allow that device. So you have to be a lot more prescriptive. You're moving you're moving towards that zero trust model of, if it's not exclusively approved, then it's not going to be allowed on the environment, whether that's a device or an action. Don't even give the possibility, don't give them the option. You may also see that in some other frameworks, they'll start referring to that as, they'll want you to handle that via some application blocking. So saying that, all right, if it is a Microsoft house and everybody is supposed to be using M365, we're going to block all Dropbox, Google Workspace, and those other types of platforms that we do not use. And they'll also ask that, data be properly segmented. There's no reason why financial information should be in the same file share location or the same SharePoint library as, your financial and your sales collateral should be different places. There's no reason why they should be sitting right next to each other with the same permissions to access. Secure configuration. Secure configuration around hardware and software is important because misconfigurations are right behind unpatched vulnerabilities as being a primary vector that threat actors are going to use to cause damage, get their footholds, pivot, make lateral movements in an environment. Also, configuration drift is a good reason why we want good security controls around configuration, because as systems are updated, reloaded, moved, they start to drift out of their initial configuration, which brings unknowns. And unknowns are the things you don't know you have to defend against. So this helps keep those under control. And there's other benefits as well. But whenever we go down and we start looking at these, well, what frameworks are asking for what controls to be put in place when it comes to secure configurations? Everybody's got something to say. Everybody has varying levels of aggressiveness here. And that's going to be heavily dependent upon, again, the sensitivity of the data and the regulatory bodies or industries that a business belongs to. You'll see here that the Essential 8 and the HIPAA security rule, they're mentioning just like one or two things. That's it. But the other frameworks are asking for a lot more. And again, that's going to owe to sensitivity of data, regulatory agencies, and other industry influences there. When we go to medium, there's still a lot of things being asked for among all the different frameworks. And then whenever we finally get up to high risk environments, there's only a few of the controls that are, a few of the frameworks that are asking for more controls. The other ones here that are all marked as NA, their assumption is you should have already been doing all of these things that we want you to do for medium risk. They've kind of made that's their baseline of, again, they've already got it covered at this point. If we look at the low risk, Again, that create and maintain is going to show up again because again, it's about processes and documentation. They're going to want to see that you've got processes for secure configuration of your assets, having proper security baselines that you're following for um, hardened images of OSs, properly configuring your firewall appliances, your ASAs, to make sure that they're set up correctly, that you have traffic in your VPN tunnels split correct, and your VPN appliance split correctly. Things like disabling default accounts, 15-minute idle timeout sessions. These are going to be a lot of common low risk controls that they're going to want you to have in play. And most of these are going to be things you've already seen or heard of or have been exposed to over the years. When we move up to medium risk, this is where we're starting getting into a little bit less of what MSPs would do and a little bit more of what internal IT teams that are properly staffed might be doing. Um, Disabling or removing unnecessary services or daemons. MSPs often come in and just support what is there. Um, and they don't poke around too much sometimes. Once you start getting to medium risk, you're supposed to poke around. You need to know what's there. And if there's not a good reason for it to be there, it needs to be removed. Forcing device lockouts, maintaining the ability to remotely wipe an asset if it's stolen or you lose control over it. And then whenever we move up to high risk, so this is where we're starting to get into things that are a little bit more of a challenge for MSPs because normally the tool sets aren't being used by a lot of clients. Um, so we're starting to get into frameworks that say there's no BYOD, there's no bring your own device. Everything in the environment needs to be under management. Mobile device management enrollment, so that mobile devices that are used to access company resources can be remotely locked, remotely wiped, or encrypt, or are forced to be encrypted. Segmenting company data from personal data on personal devices. So if they are using their smartphone to access company resources via Office 365, I mean, by Microsoft 365, uh, Microsoft Intune, Microsoft Purview, or even if they're using Google Workspaces. Those have capabilities to segment out the data. So whenever you offboard a user, that information can be removed from the device. Also, conditional access is being heavily is featuring a lot more prominently now, and it's probably going to become even more prevalent of an ask, and it may start even be something that's considered more of a medium risk security control going forward. Is conditional access. So the ability to revoke access to company resources in an automated fashion if certain security controls aren't present. So you can't access your M3, you can't fire up your PowerPoint or your Excel or Word documents and access those company resources over the network if your device isn't up to date, if it doesn't have all current patches, if it doesn't have the EDR installed and currently active. And those are a little bit more of the are more challenging for the MSP space, um, specifically because a lot of times the clients of MSPs don't always have domain control. They don't always have Azure or some other way of centralizing management. That's where they're coming to you. But the MSP specific RMM solutions usually don't support these types of actions. These are usually more enterprise solutions that aren't multi-tenant friendly. So these can be more challenging, a set of controls to implement. User and privileged account management. So account management is really important because, well, nobody needs access to what they don't need access to. Um, You want to prevent privilege creep. You don't want admins, and you don't want admins or management accounts to be provisioned out and then that's just handed out to anybody. If they're not an admin user, if they're not a power user, if they don't need those types of privileges, do not give them to them. Business owners are the absolutely worst for this, but still, even though they're the business owner, that just makes them a bigger target. You definitely don't want them to have permissions and privileges that they don't need to do their day-to-day job. For those common low risk controls, everybody's asking for something in some way, shape, or form. When we go up to medium risk, there's a few more being asked for. They're being a little bit more expansive. Some of these are going to be asking for things that the others aren't, but that's just again nature of the industry or sector they're targeted towards. But by the time you get to high risk, well, the assumption is that you've already done all of these things because these are baseline best practices. These are almost things you should be doing um, regardless of the risk profile. But well, we do have those commonalities. What are those commonalities? In low risk, they want you to create and maintain that list of accounts, primarily, focused on privileged access, good password policies, using MFA when available, disabling idle accounts that are inactive for 45 days. Then we move up to medium risk. They want to maintain an inventory of service accounts. So that might not be something that you're currently doing. They want you to know, they want to know who owns it, its functional purpose, and the last review date. I know I personally have walked into businesses before and discovered service accounts that haven't been used for 5 years. So you need to have knowledge of them. You need a record of them so that you can properly address them whenever changes need to be made. And then in the high risk, they're getting a little bit more towards, and again, none of those frameworks were calling out for anything specific, but the intention is that it becomes more automated with the revocation or lockdown of accounts. So whenever you're setting up all of those other additional security controls, you are automating it. So if the endpoint solution, security solution detects a piece of malware on the endpoint that makes modifications to that system, it reaches out via an XDR integration or SOAR integration or something else out to your M365 tenant to lock down that user's account in M365 until it can be reviewed and that risky user flag can be removed from the account in M365. And this is another good example of where going by just purely by the low, medium, high risk bucketing might not be the best idea whenever it comes to the services you're selling, in the sense of you don't want to not sell something just because somebody's not in the right risk profile. If the client has the appetite, if they have the interest, um, there's no reason why you can't implement security controls that are recommended for high risk environments in a low risk environment if the client has the appetite for it and you can make the sales pitch. Access control. So with access control, this is all about ensuring that only authorized assets and individuals have access to data or business processes, preventing malicious or intentional loss, accidental loss of data. Having good access control can also combat authorization and permission creep. You don't want users to have access to data or to processes that they no longer need for their role, because that's how you get into situations where people cut corners, self-deal, or do other things that they shouldn't be doing. So low risk, everybody's asking for something. And whenever we get into medium risk, you'll see that it kind of all of a sudden it drops off. We got 4 of these frameworks that we're referencing. Don't ask for anything more. They all kind of leave it at the, well, these are the basics, they're low risk, and we expect that to be enough. And then when we get up to high risk though, you'll see that they start asking for, a little bit more because, well, in a high risk environment, that data is more sensitive and you need to be more prescriptive and more vigilant around who can access it. So more additional controls are being asked for. The common low risk controls, again, create and maintain documentation. It's going to show up a lot for the low risk. Making sure all web portals or other publicly exposed resources have to have MFA enabled for access. Having MFA enabled for VPNs or other remote assets access. Having all admin accounts, regardless of whether they're local or cloud, MFAs enabled. And when we move up to medium risk, they start wanting to see a inventory of the authentication systems that are being used, whether that is identity management, whether that is a federated system somewhere else, part of an SSO. They want to see that documented. Auditing user access to those systems annually or more frequently, and maintaining a documented process for onboarding and offboarding of users into those environments. And then whenever we then get up into the high risk, they want you to start defining these access controls based on the roles in the business. So the functional role of individuals, whether they're the janitor or the CEO, what are their responsibilities? What do they need access to? And using those role-based access controls only on what they need to do their job and nothing more. Annual or more frequent review of those rights, permissions, and permissions, especially on highly privileged accounts or high value accounts. And also implementing separation of duties. This is a little bit more common in the controls that are a part of regulated industries or sectors. So the ISO 27001, since that's enterprise, CGIS, CMMC, they want separation of duties because that is a founding security principle. You do not allow an individual to take something from initial stage to completion all on their own, because that opens up the opportunity for them to do the job poorly, self-deal, embezzlement, sabotage, whatever. So your finance people should not and should have clear delineation from your salespeople, should have clear delineation from DevOps, and even within those individual teams or functional groups, you need cross-checking. You need people looking over people's shoulders. It's not micromanagement. It's just that I am responsible for steps 1 through 2, and then the next person is responsible for steps 3 through 4. I shouldn't be the person who puts the invoices in your billing system should not be the same person that's paying bills out with POs or your bookkeeper. Those should, whoever's doing those work, it should be separate individuals, because, well, what if I decide to put in an invoice for fraudulent charge for a fake company and then write myself a check? You don't want that to happen. Vulnerability management, and this is, I'm hoping everybody here knows that you're in the MSP space, why vulnerability management is important. Unpatched vulnerabilities are one of the primary vectors threat actors leverage. Most successful attacks leverage vulnerabilities that have had fixes or patches for them for sometimes days, weeks, months, or sometimes even years. So, proper patching, proper vulnerability remediation and mitigation is a very, very important part of good cybersecurity baselines and best practices. All of the referenced frameworks today, they've got something referencing it. Some of them will only reference it in the sense of patching and updates. Others will reference it in the ability to make discoveries of vulnerabilities. When we move up to medium, you'll see there's even more frameworks that are asking for it. But by the time we get up to the high risk, the assumption is, well, everything's been done at this point. You should have. These are such basic principle things that you shouldn't be waiting for a high risk environment to be implementing them. Those low risk controls that are common, back to create and maintain. They want to see documentation on a vulnerability management process. Um, Having remediation processes that are risk informed. So not just that we apply patches, but that we evaluate a patch, and if it is critical, we apply it within 15 days. If it's not critical, we'll apply it within the month. Medium risk, and they start asking for you to perform internal vulnerability scans quarterly or more frequently. External vulnerability scans against public facing resources, and applying remediations to those discovered vulnerabilities monthly or more frequently. And whenever we get up to high risk, well, again, they're kind of saying we should have already done all of these. But there are some of these that are not, while they are not normally within the purview of the services that managed service providers offer, they're still good things to know that these security types of security controls exist. They are implemented in large businesses and in the enterprise environments, and they can have a role to play for you or some of your larger clients. Mandatory vacation policy or job rotation. So you need to audit your individuals. This isn't being paranoid. This isn't being micromanager. This is just a natural thing you have to do if you want to say with any confidence that yes, my people do what they are supposed to do. Uh, Basically kick them out for a week. They're not in their role for a week while somebody else that understands the function of the role, the responsibilities of the role, fills in to make sure that things are being done the way that they're supposed to, that any unusual activity or unusual behavior can be discovered during that time. So while I've got this listed as an extra control because none of the frameworks we're referencing calls for this directly. These are popular, and if you can sit down and have there's not really anything for you to sell to your clients here, but if you can sit down and have a conversation with your clients concerning this, it can help show that yes, I am interested in security, not just in what's related to what I can sell you, but also your business and making it more efficient, more secure outside of just what I'm offering. Log management. So why is it important? You need logs. If you don't have logs, you don't know what happened. If you don't know what happened, then an auditor is not going to know what happened. Having good logs lets you answer those, well, what happened questions a lot easier. And if you're not on the technical side, you're more on the business operation or management side, and you've never really dug through and looked through logs. Logs are an absolute lifesaver for your engineers, technicians, help desk. If they have logs, they don't have to guess, and that can give you much better resolution of your tickets, improve KPIs, and give you other benefits, and honestly just make their jobs easier and less stressful. So all of the controls are pretty much asking for something around log management, either whether it's a collection or retention. When we move up to medium risk, there's even more pointed controls being asked for. But by the time we get up to high risk, again, the assumption is you've already done all of these things because they are such basic principles to good cybersecurity practices. You should have already been doing them in the medium risk and low risk environments. But well, what are the common ones? So we have our common low risk here. The create and maintain comes up again. They want documentation and processes for logs. What are they kept? How are they kept? How long are they kept? Enabling appropriate logging across all the assets. So you said you're going to enable the logging. Do you have methods in place to make sure it is enabled and that it's being collected and stored correctly? When we get up to medium risk, they're starting to ask for you to ensure that time sinks are in place so that logs match each other. You don't want to have to figure out correlation of events whenever the time on different systems are different. Makes it harder to find those correlations. Enabling detailed logging, maintaining DNS query audits, URL audits, record remote shell, bash, PowerShell, or other command line audit logs. That's something we can help out with our EDR solution and the deep visibility feature. Centralized log collection. And then whenever we get into high risk, well, they want you to also add into it collecting and monitoring of third-party service providers. So this would be going to your Microsoft 365 tenancy and monitoring for unusual login activities, risky user flags, monitoring for file creation, file deletion, file creation, permissions being changed on users, or having privileges elevated at unusual times of the day. Those are going to be, especially as more and more services are being moved out to a cloud service of some type. The ask is getting a lot more common that you're monitoring those as well, and not just your internal logs. Email and browser controls. So I'm hoping everybody here knows that email and web browsers are one of the primary ways through which threat actors and attackers deliver their payloads. It is popular with attackers for that reason. It is a convenient way to deliver an attack to the doorstep of a user for them to interact with. So having good security controls in place is going to help us keep our users out of trouble and from potentially introducing threats into the environment. All of our security controls at the low risk level say, yep, we want you to have a bunch of these in place. When we get up to medium risk, there are going to be a few more. And whenever we get up to high risk, then they ask for more, but only on certain frameworks. You'll see that most of the frameworks here, such as the Essential 8, Cyber Essentials, they tend to start falling off at the high risk level because they are essentials. They're saying these are baselines that you should have applied across the board, regardless of the risk profile of the environment. And that trend is going to start continuing as we go further through the more complex security controls. So low risk around mail and email and web browsing, having a content or DNS filter in place, only using currently supported browsers and email clients. Then at the medium risk, they're starting to ask for having URL filters and block lists in place, removing or disabling unauthorized browser extensions, using DMARC, SPF, and DKIM on your um, MTX domain registrar uh, information, blocking attachments based on file types not needed for legitimate business purposes. There's no reason why in this day and age your client should be getting or sending .doc files. It should be .docx at this point. They should not be getting .ps1 files. They should not be getting archive password protected archive folders or zip folders anymore. And for high risk, they ask for implementing scanning and anti-malware measures at the infrastructure level instead of the endpoint level. So they want you to move those type of anti-malware defenses away from just the endpoint out to your perimeter. Because, well, it used to be 12 years ago, 15 years ago, you got your antivirus solution or you got your endpoint protection solution for business that had a email security feature in it that would scan your emails and your attachments on the computer locally for you. The downside is that only is protecting that endpoint, and then you have all the additional workload of managing that, keeping it up to date, make sure that it's working correctly. The recommendation is you take that out to the perimeter now. You put it as a service within your email server or prior to your email server. That way you're dealing with the threats before they get to the end user, regardless of how the end user gets to that email. Because if all you have is an endpoint protection solution, an AV that has an email security feature in it, that's only protecting the computer it's installed on. What if they access their company email through a web browser, or they access it via their mobile device, or they're at home on their personal computer and then they access that email account through a web portal? You're not going to be able to protect them if you're relying on an agent-based email security tool. Sandboxing and other self-detonation of attachments for evaluation. And also continuing to move those defenses to the initial ingress and away from endpoints so that you're doing your scanning and your evaluation and your uh, uh, email phishing attacks and your active campaigns, moving that filtering, spam filtering, and everything else away from endpoints up to a monolithic service that's either a part of your email server or an additional security solution in front of it. And question that came in yet, MailerSure does sandbox attachments. There is some logic there on which types of attachments it will sandbox and detonate for evaluation purposes. Basically, it is if it cannot understand what it is, it doesn't know what the attachment is, it will try to open it up, run it. Sometimes it'll only uncompress it so it can see the manifest for the file, start looking for other indicators. But yeah, our MailerSure product does do sandboxing. Malware defense and continuous monitoring. So this is the big one that most of your clients are going to come to you and say, I'm worried about cybersecurity. This is what they're talking about: malware defenses, antivirus, things of that nature. So of course it is important to us because this is the easiest thing for our clients to grasp. And it is one of the primary challenges that are being faced by businesses today. It's the easy one to understand. It is the one that is in the news. And businesses know that they need to be defended against it. And also, whenever it comes to this, it is a case of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Whatever you can do ahead of time to prevent malware from doing damage is going to be better than having to repair the damage done by malware or ransomware. For our low risk malware defenses, we're going to be asking, we're going to see that all of the frameworks are asking for something. They're all going to have a lot of really common good baselines in place. When we start getting to medium, still everybody's pretty much in agreement. But then whenever we get out to, again, by the time we get out to high risk, the assumption is these are all things you should have already been doing for your low and medium. So there's not that much more that you all of a sudden get into just because it's a high risk environment. Common controls, they want you to have an anti-malware solution on all assets. Make sure that's being updated on a reasonable cadence. Restricting removal media from autoplay or auto mount or other protection methods to keep a user from just plugging in any old random USB drive and bringing in a piece of malware. Medium risk, they want you to implement, making sure that those external media is being scanned before being accessed by the system. Um, Implementing anti-exploitation solutions like Windows data execution prevention. If you're not familiar with that, and that's the first time you've ever heard it, write it down as a note, go Google it, do a little research on it. It is a free piece of security improvement you can implement in most environments. And then whenever we get out to high risk, what they really start asking for is that you perform threat hunting activities for the active threat campaigns that are targeting the respective industry or sector of that business. If it is a financial institute, if it's a little local credit union, they're going to want you to perform threat hunting exercises that are targeting the indicators of compromise and the tactics, techniques, and processes that financial threat actors and advanced persistent threat groups use. And AVD, so that is reversed. That should be Insight and MAV and Essential and AVD. I got those reversed. Insight is the managed, Insight should be managed AV, Essential should be AV Defender. Screw that up. Or EDR can help out here as well. EDR has a little bit more of a meaningful role to play here for us, because the EDR with a complete license and the deep visibility feature enabled allows you to actually conduct threat hunting exercises. It is a new skill you have to learn. It's not something that everybody is going to be proficient at. It is something that takes time, effort, experience to get good with. And a good threat, and just for perspective sakes, and with the way today's markets are, especially the labor market, a proficient security analyst who is decent at threat hunting is going to be somewhere between $80,000 to $100,000 a year salary in any major metro area, if not more. So this is one of those situations where consuming threat hunting as a service from a compliancy or a red team, purple team company or whatever, you're probably going to have to consume that as a service rather than something you stand up internally. Not that you can't aspire to it and start learning it, but starting out of the gate and you've never done it before, it is not a service you're probably going to be able to stand up and immediately turn around and start selling. So next section, data recovery. So previous section, we talked about data protection. Now this is about data recovery. Those are going to be treated as very distinct things in most of the frameworks. And why is it important? Well, hey, you need to have things in place to recover for when everything else goes wrong. You need to plan for that resiliency. Um, this also extends into the larger principle of being able to continue operations, having the resiliency for uh, mission critical services and business functions to continue regardless of what the may be impacting your IT infrastructure. This is more business continuity than it is disaster recovery, but it is an important aspect that these frameworks speak to, and also uh, it is a revenue opportunity as well for MSPs. So low risks, what's being asked for? Um, Everybody's got something they want to have in place. The oddly enough, the CGIS, um, while I've got it here as NA, it's not that it doesn't ask for it. It's that it just doesn't have a, it's mentioned everywhere. So it's kind of hard to find a place to kind of call it out individually, but it doesn't have the same type of section header like a lot of the other frameworks have whenever it comes to data recovery. In medium risk environments, they're not asking for a lot more. And by the time you get to high risk, well, they're not asking for anything else. And that's because this is considered to be baseline. It's considered to be something that you should be doing in all environments, regardless of what the risk profile is, because regardless of what happens, why it happens, you need to be able to get that data back. So the common controls, creating, documenting. So again, creating and documenting those processes. Define the scope of data you're protecting, automate it so it's done weekly or more frequently. Protecting your data at rest with at least the same controls as the data in production. Getting backups isolated from production environments or even offsite, because backups and backup appliances are popular targets for a threat actor if they are making lateral movements within an environment. If they find a backup appliance or a backup solution, that's going to be a target for them, whether it's going to be to use it to exfiltrate data or to destroy those backups so you can't recover from them prior to deploying a ransomware attack. In medium risk, the common controls that get asked for is going to be testing your backups quarterly or more frequently for the recoverability and integrity of the data. That's something that we can help with through Insight and Essential if you're using other backup solutions, as far as making sure that's happening and facilitating, make it a slightly easier process for you. Our code data protection, our backup solution has that recovery testing built into the platform and available for you. You can do it monthly or twice a month. Also, testing and refining that recovery process at least once a year. So not only are you testing that the backups are good and that the data is and that the data integrity is there, but also that the restore processes and the documentation work, that the actual uh, uh, process of restoring back into production is successful. And then whenever we get into high risk, since all of the frameworks are basically saying, hey, by the time you get to medium risk, all these things need to be in place. There are some extra high risk controls that are not in the data recovery um, controls. It is close enough and similar enough that I'm going to include them here, but they're usually off in their own section. And that's around maintaining warm or hot sites and failover for mission critical systems. Once you get into high risk environments, you know, the integrity availability of data is not just a business function convenience, and if it's gone, the business isn't making money. In a high risk environment, that's starting to cause actual damage. That might be irreparable damage to the business, to a third party, or it may even be physical damage. So in those types of environments where that risk profile is that high, you need to start looking at implementing warm and hot sites and failover for mission critical systems. MSPs, again, this is one of those kind of growing pains things, depending on how mature your MSP is, the kind of clients you've been able to provide services to in the past. This might be above and beyond what you can handle. Your clients probably don't have the budget to stand up hot secondary sites or even cold sites where they can go stand up operations if the building burns down. So this honestly might be out of the scope for some of your clients, but I wouldn't make that decision for your clients. I would make it a part of your quarterly business reviews to sit down with your clients and have an honest discussion with them about what it's going to take to get them back in working order after a worst case scenario ransomware attack. There was a hospital in Illinois, St. Margaret, I believe it was Illinois. They closed up. They ceased operations a few weeks ago, and they blamed it partially on a ransomware attack they suffered 2 years ago, because they went for almost 2 months without earning money because their finance systems were down. So have this conversation with your clients. Let them know that, yeah, sure, if a server goes down, I can restore that for you within 8 hours. That's within our SLA. But if your whole systems go down and we got to rebuild back up, it's going to take us 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. Let them make the decision on if that's good enough, or if they do want to stand up, secondary sites, whether that's maybe that's just standing up a mission critical server as a hot secondary in Azure. Maybe you want to do that using our Cove data protection with a standby image, or maybe you want to repurpose an appliance for them at a second business location, whatever it is, but give them the opportunity to make that decision rather than you making the decision for them based on, well, I know my client doesn't have the budget. That's true. They may not have the budget, but let them make the decision. It might surprise you to find out that being basically out of business for 5 days and losing a couple of $100,000 because of it is enough to convince the business that, yeah, I probably should pay you an extra $800 a month to make sure there's a hot standby of my mission critical server somewhere. Network infrastructure firmware and secure design. And I am going to start clipping through these a little bit faster just because, well, got a lot of slides left and I want to at least touch on them all. But again, if there's something you want me to spend a little bit more time talking about, throw it in the questions panel and I'll get an answer in for it. Well, in network infrastructure, why is it important? Well, almost everything a business does nowadays flows over the network. Almost all your business functions are going to rely in some way, shape, or form on a network or an internet connection, so we need to take care of them. They are the sources. They are the source of benefit, but they're also the source of majority of the threats you're going to be exposed to. And if not the source, at least the means by which they are leveraged. All our frameworks, except for the PCIS, DSS, CMMC, and even the ISO, they don't have anything explicitly speaking to this in a low risk sense. But the other ones do. But whenever we pop up to medium risk, we'll see that all of a sudden a bunch of things start popping in, a bunch of security controls, and quite a few security controls are being asked for. And whenever we get out to the high risk, there are still going to be some common security controls that are going to be asked for. And for low risk ones, what are the common ones? They want you to keep all network infrastructure patched with the most recent stable firmwares, and they want that done monthly or more frequently. That's the common item that almost all of the frameworks are asking for. When we go up to medium risk, the common things that are starting to be asked for is, well, they want you to implement, maintain, and design a secure network that is supported by either physical or logical maps and segmentation of the networks, ensuring that the secure protocols are going to be used. No TLS 1.1 or 1.0, no SMB version 1. Making sure you have a centralized control method for authentication and authorization of network access by devices and users. That can be into implementing conditional access control, or that could just be, even old school MAC filtering if you wanted. And then inside of the high risk environments, they want you to start segmenting the networks physically or logically into business functions. You're going to have your guest network, then you're going to have your regular user networks, and then you're going to have your administrative and critical network setup, and then a separate network for IT management and infrastructure management. Each one of those is going to be a different VLAN or a different physical network if needed. Having secure WAN redundancy, so whether that's failover or round robin, having a secondary external internet connection available. Implementing web application firewalls for cloud applications or any external facing resources. Also, they ask for physical security of demarcation and telco rooms. So you should not be able to walk into a business, walk by the front desk, turn a corner, open a door, and then go physically touch a server. You're not supposed to be able to do that. You're not supposed to go in and be able to go to the telco closet in the middle of the office, open the door, and there's all of the switches with all of the unpopulated ports available for you to plug directly into. Physical security is very important. It is something that is overlooked by a lot of MSPs, but there's projects involved in that. There's revenue involved in it. Sometimes making the case about why is it a bad idea that somebody can just come in and physically touch what your business runs on. Usually whenever I got pushback, whenever I was with my MSP back in the day, I usually just pitched it as, look, if you had a piece of equipment in a factory that was responsible for 80% of the revenue generation of that business, and if that machine ever went down, the business is basically screwed until it's back up again. Think of your server as that machine. Think of your network switch as that machine. If it goes down, if it's compromised, if it's not available, then your business isn't operating. So just as you wouldn't let any old random person off the street come in and lay hands on that mission critical piece of equipment in your factory, somebody shouldn't be able to come in and lay hands on your servers, network equipment, or anything else either. Network monitoring and defense. So these are treated separately in most of the frameworks. Some of the frameworks kind of talk of them together. Most of them talk about them separately, but they're still the same thing. You're still concerned with them for the same reasons. Networks are the backbones of the business. You need control over it. You need monitoring. You need to know what's happening there. Now, this is where we start seeing the controls that are being asked for kind of starting to invert, where the low risk environments say you don't need anything here. But as we get into the more to the medium risk environments and into the high risk environments, there are a lot more controls all of a sudden being asked for at these higher levels. And that is because sensitivity of data that's going to be touched in these types of environments. Now, the more sensitive the data is, the more damage that can be done. If that data is lost or abused, the higher the risk. So again, there's no low risk, there's no common low risk controls here. So we start out with medium risk. They're asking for the implementation of a SIM or other centralized security event monitoring and alerting solution, host-based intrusion detection on high-risk or mission-critical systems, implementing a network-based IDS and intrusion detection system, restricting and filtering traffic between segmented networks, conditional access controls, maintaining network flow logs and reviewing those in response to what your SIM might be alerting you to. And then whenever we get up to high risk, it starts asking for host-based and network-based intrusion prevention systems, which are different than detection. If you have never had an opportunity to explore or use an IDS or an IPS and you want to get your feet wet, open source, for an open source option, go check out Security Onion. That's a good tool that has a little bit more than just IDS, IPS in it, but it's a free tool, pretty good community support around it, fairly easy to learn. Also, web application firewalls being implemented and monitored, disabling unused ports on switches, application level filtering. So making sure that on your firewall perimeter filtering, you're not allowing connections to external resources, or internal to the network, you're not allowing certain applications to communicate back and forth. Common examples there are going to be if you are a Microsoft 365 business, there's no reason why employees should be connecting to Google Workspaces or Dropbox, or they shouldn't be using XMPP based messaging services. So you can use application firewalling to handle, to take care of that. Implicit deny, moving over to an implicit deny design of your networks, that everything is blocked except for what is required. This can be a giant headache if you are not a network engineer. This is a mountain climb, but it is kind of what they start to ask for in these high risk environments. And creating and refining on an ongoing basis your thresholds and your detection rules. Network-based monitoring is one of those things where you don't just set it up the one time and it does its thing and you never go back to it. It needs TLC. It needs to be monitored, modified, and refined all the time to really get the full benefit out of it. Cyber hygiene and security awareness training. So I hope everybody understands the importance of this. End users, they are our best line of defense. They're sometimes the last line of defense, but they're also often the worst line of defense. You need them to have skin in the game, to understand what their responsibilities are for protecting themselves and their business. It can't all be just you. They need to be a part of the fight. They need to take their role as a defender as seriously as yours. Low risk environments, everybody's asking for everything to implement controls. Whenever we move up to medium risk, a few of them are asking for some additional controls, but by the time we get out to high risk, the assumption is you've already covered all of this. This has already been implemented, and just because it's there's nothing more that you should be doing that you shouldn't already have been doing in your low and mediums. For the common low risk, having a security awareness program, the fact you've got one going that is a part of onboarding new employees and annual training. Um, they're being trained to recognize and report social engineering attacks. They're trained on how to recognize and report out of compliance software. Everybody's supposed to be on a specific line of business application, being able to raise a ticket or a warning to IT whenever, hey, I'm not on the current version. Did you miss this? Then for medium risk, we've got it's asked you to do, again, everything you're already doing, but it wants you to refine that training to more targeted training, because the cybersecurity awareness and hygiene training that a general user needs is going to be different than a privileged user or a powered user. It's going to be different than the training that a C-suite board member or an owner of a business is going to receive, because they are a much more high value target, and they're going to be hit with different styles of attacks and whale phishing attacks. And then also your IT teams, they're going to need a separate tailored training for them. And whenever we get out to high risk, again, they're already saying, hey, all of these things should have already been done. It's not these are the basics. This should have been in place for, regardless of whether you were high, medium, or low, basically. Which kind of makes it easy whenever it comes to selecting and designing security awareness training programs, because most of the programs that you can go out there and buy today and either resell or co-manage with a client, most of those solutions already have this targeted type of role-based training already implemented. You don't have to jump through any additional hoops. It's already available for you. And this is one of those things, security awareness training. This is something that I absolutely positively advise. Do not try to implement this internally yourself and figure out how to do it. There are a million and one different very good programs out there. Go subscribe to one of them. One question. The IPS solution I was referring to a while ago was Security Onion. It is an open source product. They also have a professional services arm where you can buy pre-configured appliances from them, but you can literally just download the distro, grab an old decommissioned box, install it on there, and there you go. You got an IPS system that you can connect to a span port or mirrored port on your managed switch and start monitoring traffic in the network. So service provider management, security controls here. Well, why is this important? Well, everybody knows supply chain compromises are real. They're one of the things that we really worry about in the MSP space. If you've got good security controls around it, though, well, you're going to be better prepared for an incident. You're going to know who to call, who's responsible for what. And also, it's important to realize that you are a third-party service provider to your clients. So some of these controls are going to, just as much as they apply to your clients and yourself and the third parties you engage with, it also applies to the relationship between you and your clients. Some of the frameworks ask for this in the low risk. Not everybody does, but whenever we get up to medium risk, it is more prevalent. We'll see even into the high risk, there are some still more additional controls that they want you to implement around your third-party service providers. For low risk, it's fairly simple. They just want you to maintain a list of the third-party service providers that process, store, transmit data, or provide some type of business function for you. Who they are, contact number, those general information that you maintain about a vendor. When we get up to medium risk, they want you to start, being more aggressive. They want you to create and maintain um, a list of your third-party service providers with a policy and procedures document, making sure that you reach out to those third-party service providers and get their security statements and their practices. Classifying those third-party service providers based on the data they process or the business function that they deliver. Does the third-party service provider contracts include governance or regulation or compliancy statements? If you're providing services for a medical client and they've got a third-party vendor that they're consuming services from, do they have a BAA, a business associate agreement, in place or not? Whenever we are up to high risk, they want you to start, and need to define a process, a predefined process for offboarding a third-party service provider. So it's about the not trying to figure it out during the middle of the process. If you decide you need to pull a third-party service provider out of your infrastructure and you need to do it fast for whatever reason, whether it's malicious, whether it's a mitigation move, it's a contract move, whatever it is, you already need to have it all planned out what needs to happen and in what order before you need to do it. A yearly or more frequent review of third-party terms of service or EULA agreements or contracts. Monitoring threat feeds for your secure third-party service providers. That can take the form of just listening to what's being said in the news, but also actually subscribing to threat feeds from security services or a dark web monitoring service to make sure that your third-party service providers domain name doesn't show up in a database leak somewhere. Requesting third-party audit results such as SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or the PCI DSS attestation of compliance reports. Whenever there's that, not just the relationship with that third-party service provider is not just that they are giving you a service, but that it's a business critical service and that they are touching data and they have some expectation of responsibility to handle that data with due care and due diligence. Having those types of third-party audits proves that they can. Application security. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one since it's not something that many MSPs are actually in. Not many MSPs actually are actively developing applications. Usually the extent of it is low code or no code implementations, but at that point you're still just using somebody else's already built tool. You're not really going to have to worry about it at the same level as you would if you were doing actual application development. And why are we concerned with it? Well, I mean, an application is only secure as the people that design and build it and the processes that support them makes it. And any application, doesn't matter who builds it, with what platform, with what tools, there are going to be vulnerabilities in it from the time it is built. And it's important to have good security controls and processes around minimizing that. Because this isn't that common and because it's not something that many businesses do, especially not smaller, smaller businesses that have low risk profiles, none of the frameworks directly reference application security and secure application development. When we get up to medium risk, they start asking for it, and whenever we're in high risk, there are more controls that are being asked for. The medium risk controls, back to create and maintain, they want to see They want to see documentation and processes being established for your security procedures, your secure lifecycle management, your vulnerability lifecycle management around the whatever application you're creating, having ways for um, root cause analysis to be performed, a method for vulnerabilities to be reported by users and others, not reusing, not creating security components that don't have to be created out of whole cloth. If you need a encryption function inside of an application, don't try to roll your own. Go use an established, vetted, and trusted encryption module to do it. And then out on the high risk, they want you to get it nailed down. They want that secure system development lifecycle management process in place. They want the code to be audited as it is generated with static and dynamic analysis tools. Penetration testing by a third party, both black box and open box. Map the architecture and the infrastructure that's going to support it. Implementing zero trust access to your DevOps resources, so that whenever somebody is going to access the code repository, that there are proper controls there to keep that secure. And threat modeling and continuous audits. There should be probably a monthly exercise of everybody that's responsible for the development of the app sitting down and saying, all right, these are the new tactics, techniques, and processes that we've seen being used in the space recently. These are the successful attacks we've seen against against the components or modules that we use in our product, or we've seen similar attacks. How do we defend against it? Incident response management. So this is one of those fuzzy set of security controls that, depending upon your experience as an MSP, how long you've been in operation, whether you have previous enterprise experience or not, incident response is going to mean different things to different people. But boiling it down, you do not want to be stuck in a situation where you are trying to figure out what to do in the middle of an emergency. You do not want your technicians or engineers standing there trying to figure out, do I need to turn off the computers, or do I need to unplug them, or do I need to shut down the network in the middle of a ransomware attack? They already need to know what that answer is because of your declared incident response program. Also, knowing what you should be doing around incident response means you're not being redundant about processes. What you need to do is defined, and what your clients need to do is defined, and what the third-party incident response team that's going to come in from the insurance, the insurer, whenever a claim is filed, that needs to be documented and known ahead of time. Again, you don't want to figure out during the middle of an emergency. Dave McKinnon, and even though I'm saying that, you don't want to have to figure it out during the middle of an emergency. At the same time, everybody's got a plan until you're punched in the face. So you still need to improve them once they are in place. Low risk environments, all the frameworks are asking for something here, except for Essential 8 and the Cyber Essentials. They don't call it out by name, but you'll need incident response. Is going to be a part of those services anyway. It's kind of unspoken. It just doesn't have a giant neon sign on it. For medium risk, there are still more additional controls being asked for, and by the time we get out to high risk, there's a handful of additional controls that are being asked for, but they're not universal. So those low risk controls, create and maintain a list of roles with associated responsibilities. you need one person and a backup person designated as your incident response manager or kind of leading incident responses. That's usually going to be the CSO, CISO, CTO of a company. Most of your clients as an MSP, they are not going to have a CTO, CISO, or CSO. So that responsibility is probably going to fall to you. Then whenever we get up into medium risk, now they want you to develop and maintain an incident response process. They start calling for having separate and dedicated incident response plans, which is a total all-encompassing document about how you handle incident response, and then incident response playbooks for specific types of incidents or affected assets. So you'll probably wind up with one incident response plan and then a different incident response playbook for a ransomware attack, for a business email compromise scenario, for an email server winding up on a spam blacklist. Now, all of those things are going to wind up with different incident playbooks. Business continuity and disaster processes are created and documented. You have communication plans established and reviewed yearly for the communications with legal, PR, and any regulatory agencies. Again, you do not want to be in the panic in the middle of trying to figure out what's happened, what damage is being done, and then at the same time also trying to figure out, well, who do I need to call? Those are, any questions that you can answer before the incident need to be answered before the incident. And then when we get up to high risk, they want you to continuously refine your threat thresholds that you have defined for incidents. Your incidents need to be categorized and responded to appropriately, with there being documented and recorded differences between how you handle a data privacy violation versus just picking up unusual activity on the network versus discovering an application vulnerability. Also, they call for events to be appropriately reported. And this is less about the security of it, of making the environment more secure, and more towards the business and legal obligations, that who needs to be notified is notified in a timely manner. Stakeholders are notified, whether that's the fusion center for your local state and the FBI field office, whatever it may be, whatever your local jurisdictions dictate. Good example of this is if you are in, I believe now, might be Pennsylvania. I know North Carolina has this requirement now. If you are an MSP and you are providing services to a public entity, so a township, to a police office, sheriff department, to town hall, whatever. If you are providing managed services to one of those types of public entities and they get hit with ransomware, you have to report that to the state. You can't just deal with it. You have to let them know. And I believe in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, you have to let them know before you even do anything, as far as either communicating with the threat actor that perpetrated the attack, negotiating about ransomware payments or anything like that. You cannot do any of that until you bring the state in. And then there's even some states now where it takes a proclamation of an emergency from the governor in order to negotiate around ransomware. So important to know your local regulations. Penetration testing. So this is our last section of security controls. penetration testing. Well, why is this important? Well, you cannot fix what you do not know about, and you are not going to know about something that you don't currently know about until somebody points it out. That is the purpose of the penetration test. I've had people ask me in the past, how do I prepare for a penetration test? The answer is you don't prepare for a penetration test. That is the purpose of it. If you knew how to prepare for the penetration tests so that they didn't find anything, you wouldn't need the penetration test. A little bit of a circular logic there, but that is the purpose of them. They are going to be bringing skill sets and capabilities that you do not have. They are going to find things that you're not going to find. This also helps out with kind of the who watches the watchers questions. If you have clients that want some affirmation or reinforcement that you're doing what you're supposed to do to be keeping them safe, bringing in a third party respected penetration testing team to do it is going to carry a lot of value. So low risk environments, surprise, nobody's asking for anything on the frameworks because it is a resource and time intensive exercise to do proper pen testing. Now, as an MSP, as a business, does that mean you shouldn't be doing pen testing for your low risk clients? Not really. It's a business opportunity. And you've also probably have it scaled and are efficient enough at the delivery of it that it still has value to do it. For medium risk, we start seeing that some of the frameworks are calling out and asking for penetration services to be put in play. And whenever we're out to high risk, there are a few that have some additional controls that they want to have in place. So medium risk, what are they asking for? They want internal penetration testing that's going after the network, line of business applications, any APIs that are being used internally, the endpoints themselves, secure, and also being able to detect between secure configuration settings and vulnerabilities, also physical security. And on the external penetration testing, they want to see websites, web applications, also environmental and social engineering, external attack simulations, and that you are implementing mitigations based on those deficiencies that are discovered during the penetration testing. Whenever we move into the high risk environments, they're going to start asking for performing annual open box testing of internal applications, process, and workflow. So they're expanding it out to not just say, hey, you can't just throw in an automated pen testing service here. It needs to be backed up by humans. It needs to be backed up by intelligence and further digging and you exposing how your systems work so that the pen testers have a better understanding of your operations and your functions so that they can, well, be better at their job of finding deficiencies and problems that need to be corrected. And also important at this level is not just to apply fixes for what the penetration testers find and report, but also work with the penetration testing team. Ask them what tools they use, what tactics, techniques, and processes they used, so that you can go and apply updates to your capabilities, to your detections, to your rule sets, bring in new tools, new security appliances so that you can detect their behavior in your environments that you weren't detecting while they were in there poking around. We have hit the end of the hour for the session. Also, as a reminder, as you attend the boot camps and office hours and other events that the nerds and other Enableites put on for you, you're earning points for recognition through the R-Star program, and that'll get you, sometimes it'll get you swag, other times it'll get you brought on stage at events for recognition, and an opportunity for you to kind of stand up and show that, yeah, I'm taking this seriously, I'm consuming this knowledge, these resources, and hopefully being able to say that, yes, they are benefiting us. They're making us better MSPs. All right, I have to hop for another presentation. Again, as always, thank you for joining us today. You appreciate the fact that as an MSP, it's hard to reserve a whole 2 hours to sit here and listen to a vendor. So much appreciated. And hopefully we'll see you on some future boot camps and office hours.